Well, welcome everybody to a new episode of the Art Business Podcast. My name is David Bellingham. I'm Program Director of the Masters in Art Business at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London, where my students study for a year, art business. And those of you on the video will already see that we don't just have my main guest today, Clare Strand, artist, but also two of the students who were involved in a project that they collaborated with Claire on recently. So I'm going to start by introducing Claire. You're very welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
And Claire is a UK-based artist who works with, but mostly against, the photographic medium. Over the past 25 years, Claire's made work with found imagery, kinetic machinery, web programs, fairground attractions, and most recently, large-scale paintings and chamber music. Claire often rejects the default settings of the photographic medium and instead, and without apology, welcomes a subtle, slow burn approach. Her practice is situated somewhere between control and a willful acceptance of chance. And I just couldn't resist, Claire, quoting your own words on a way of describing you. It sounds fascinating. So maybe we could start by asking you how you first became aware of art, maybe any childhood memories. And I guess the big question is, did you grow up like surrounded in an art family, or like me, did you kind of have to discover that yourself at a later age?
Yeah, no, I certainly didn't come from an art family whatsoever. Um, I was brought up in the kind of outskirts of Croydon, um, and not that that means anything, but art was not something that touched our lives at all. We never went to museums, galleries. Um, we did kind of nice stuff. I'm not feeling bad about it, but no, art was not in our lives at all. And so I think in some ways that's in some ways continued in me. I think when I want to feel inspired, or if I want to go to somewhere that somewhere that's of interest to me, it wouldn't necessarily be a gallery or an exhibition. Obviously I'll take in quite a few of them, but that's not really my go-to. It would probably be like some kind of strange magazine that I would pick up in a corner of a library, or I don't know, something like that. But no, it was never a going concern of being involved in art in our house. And therefore I had no idea that that there was a job title going out there of being an artist at all. And I always find it kind of quite interesting when artists say they always wanted to be artists, and I feel a little bit envious of them in a way, but that was just never on. It was just not something that I had considered at all.
Yeah, no, same here. I grew up in Gravesend on the Thames Estuary, which you probably have heard of. And, we were like an hour's train journey just under from Charing Cross in London. And whenever I went with my parents, I think we used to go to the British Museum sometimes, but we didn't go to the National Gallery or Serpentine, Tate as it was,
Mhm.
Tate Gallery as it was then. That came later, obviously. But what I was going to ask you is, I know that you like to work to some extent with the photographic medium. So
Mm.
I think probably both of us had some kind of early Kodak camera. I had a little Brownie actually that was an antique at the time that you put a roll of film in. I remember I had to go to a special chemist because the kind of film that Kodak Brownie cameras, they were like little box cameras, Michelina and Mora, like really, really old-fashioned things that you only see in antique stores now. And you had to get special film for it, and it was black and white. I used to love it though, and I couldn't wait. That was what was exciting about analog photography. You couldn't wait until you saw the results. So I wonder whether you ever came across a camera when you were a child or.
Yeah, I did. I remember asking for one actually. I must have been probably about 7, and it was I can't even remember what it was, but it was like one of those very long ones with an orange button on top, which was quite unfortunate because whenever you press the button, you'd go like that. But yeah, so that was something that I had asked for, but not necessarily. It wasn't like the gateway into a photographic career for me. I think what I enjoyed was looking at, as I said, like magazines and books and just seeing the images inside. I was really interested when I was younger. I think most people are into the paranormal and to crime, which and I used to go to the library and get the old paperbacks, and you'd just be able to look at the pages and you'd see where the photographs were in them because the page quality changed, paper quality, open up and look at them. And I just found them really engaging because they certainly weren't artful. They were very basic images, very basically printed, black and white, and very utilitarian. And that was, I think, my inspiration for being interested in imagery. I had no idea that this was what it would lead to, but that I can kind of see as a stepping stone in some ways. And then probably what is quite interesting is that growing up in Croydon, I went to a school called Riddlesdown, and it's the same school that Kate Moss was at, funnily enough. She was a year under me. And it was when her modeling career started. You know, we were she was very young. And I remember her being on the cover of the Face magazine. And, you know, and those pictures of Corinne Day took of her. And it was just the most oddest thing because, you know, she was, I think, like 15, I would have been 16. And it was just a really jarring experience to see someone of my age doing a modeling shoot like that, where she was naked, and it had a really, or semi-naked, and it had a really big effect on me. And from that moment on, I started buying the Face, and then I started looking at fashion. And so that again is another kind of stepping stone. And what's interesting is that I remember looking at those pictures and that Corinne Day did. I didn't know who she was at that time, but thinking, God, this is so far away from me in experience, so far away. And then it was like about 10, 20 years later, I was on a panel with Corinne Day talking about our work together. So it was amazing, this kind of full circular history coming back at me in a way. And it's quite significant actually for me. As you can imagine.
Absolutely. Did you ever talk to Kate? She's in the year below you, or have any contact at all?
Oh, well, she wasn't my best friend, that's for sure. But we were in similar circles, especially when we left school, because you go out in Croydon and everyone would go to the same pubs and stuff like that. But her life accelerated very quickly, whereas mine kind of, as did most people's, just sort of not accelerate so quickly, but just go in very sturdy steps. But no, I have no connection with her whatsoever.
Yeah, I remember listening to Desert Island Discs, obviously. I remember she was on that, and just for any listeners, if you don't know this very sort of British BBC radio regular program, it's been going for decades, and guests such as Kate Moss have to choose a number of favorite records that speak to different stages of their life, and they have to then choose one that they can take to their desert island only, and then they can choose like a luxury object, and they're given Shakespeare and the Bible, all this stuff. So the one with Kate was really interesting actually, and yeah, I can hear her accent now actually, and note that is probably that Southeast London accent that you still retain. I'm glad to hear.
Or I do I? I hadn't really noticed. Yeah, no, my husband says to me, it's that Croydon accent. You can take the girl out of Croydon, but you can't take the Croydon out of.
Well, we've become kind of middle class, and I got a scholarship to a public school because people can't place my accent, so that's quite interesting. Anyway, but accents are interesting. I don't know how it works in Mora's and Michelina's societies, whether you have different accents, you can tell which social class someone is from, or maybe at this stage actually, let's just introduce my two graduands, I think we call them, because they've now submitted their dissertations at the end of their master's degree and are waiting to graduate, the Latin word graduand. First, I'd like to let's introduce Maura first, as she came into the room first. And Maura, would you like to tell us where you are at the moment, and maybe what you're doing? Are you just freewheeling?
Of course. Well, I'm Mora. I'm now in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. That's my home country. And now it's summer here, so I came for summer holidays, and I'm planning to come back to London soon. I'm planning to curate an exhibition of a friend here in Buenos Aires. now in November. So it's like a solo show in a small space, in like more like under a kind of art scene. But I'm really happy to do that. So I feel like this project and get involved in this project we did with Claire was like amazing also for my experience. Yeah.
And we'll come back to that obviously in more
Yes,
detail at the
of
moment.
course.
So thank you, Maura. And Michelina, where are you at the moment? And is it warm?
Yes, it's fairly warm. I'm in London,
Oh,
and I started working lately, so I'm actually calling from a little bit of a dungeon of my office to have a silence for you. But I'm also involved in activities in Poland since I'm Polish. So I'm a bit of in London, and as Maura in Argentina, I'm also in Poland. And actually, I'm very excited because we are going for Warsaw Art Fair next week. And it's quite a big event in Poland, the only biggest fair that is happening actually in the whole country. And I'm going to help one gallery, which is from my region, and exhibit there. So very excited to be able to work in London, but also represent my country back home. So yeah, that's what I'm up to now.
that sounds tremendous. I just wish I had time and money to
Yeah,
travel across to Warsaw for the fair, maybe one day.
yeah.
So while we're talking about education and obviously postgraduate education, Maura and Michelina are probably almost at the end of their formal education, unless they decide to do PhDs, which some of our students do. So Claire, did education affect did you do the kind of traditional go to art school thing?
Not really, no. So when I was it's quite interesting because my daughters are sort of at this stage now. No, one's at university, one's 19, one's 15. But when I left school when I was 16, there wasn't, and you'll know this, David, too, is that you were flung out. I mean, in some ways it was your decision what you did. Now you have to go to college or you have to have an apprenticeship. They don't just leave you. But I think really it's quite funny because not that it's a bad thing to do, but I think my mum always figured that I would be an air hostess. So she kind of pushed me to sign up for travel and tourism. And I remember going to one of the classes and just thinking this is not going to work, and left. And then she said, well, you've got to go get a job then. So I went to Capital Job Finder, if you may remember that. It was in the Capital Radio building. And just went up there and said, right, I need a job. And eventually I ended up working at the National Herald Tribune, which is kind of odd, which was in Covent Garden. And it sounds very glamorous, but it wasn't. It was in the distribution department. So basically we were just counting all the number of newspapers that came back from each W.H. Smiths all over the world. Or John Mackenzie's, you remember them? And so I was there, and I was just, working, and it was just a very, very odd time because I felt incredibly young, but sort of, well, this is the way it is. This is how the world works, and this is it. So, and then eventually I started to get a little bit stressed because all of my friends were at college and then one of my friends was doing a course in journalism, and one of the parts of it was photography, and her mum bought her a camera. And I remember looking at that and thinking, I have a feeling. What is this feeling? It could be jealousy. I want that camera. And I still have it because I stole it from her. It was like a 25 quid thing. I mean, it was secondhand thing, but because I just thought, no, I think that's mine. I think that's something. She was cool with it. It's fine. And then I left work and I signed up for a BTEC. And I did a BTEC in photography in Epsom, at a college called Nescott. And then when that finished, that was 2 years. That's how I got my A levels. And then I thought, and everyone was like going on to degree, but I was like, I'm not sure, because there was never that push to do really anything within academia. But I had to think about it. I knew that I liked Brighton, and I thought, if there's a course in Brighton that I can do, I'll do it. And there wasn't. And then bizarrely one just appeared. It was it just started for a degree in Brighton in photography. And so I applied for that, and that's where it all started, really. And then after that, I took a year break, and then I did my MA at the Royal College of Art. So it was never really planned. There was never an academic plan. It was just sort of like falling into things, I would think. But, you know, I do have an academic career, really. But that was very early days. I think I left my MA in like 98, something like that. So, or 99.
Yeah,
So
I totally empathize with what you're saying about, you know, particularly the kind of family background. It sounded as though your family background was not dissimilar to mine, that, you know, your parents just said, well, just get a job then. And
yeah,
they got a little bit freaked when I came home one day and said, I've heard these other boys saying they're going to this thing called university and you could get grants for it that we used to be able to get. So they
yeah,
realized that they could, you know, that I could just go, and they supported me the moment I decided to do that. They thought it was a bit weird I was doing Latin and classical archaeology, but, you know, my dad had taken me to Rome and Pompeii because I'd loved it at school. And it's interesting the way, you know, and I love them now so much. They're, rest in peace, both of them. But I often, you think so much about, I wish I had longer to sort of thank you for. Now I realize what you actually helped me with, what you gave me. But you're quite right. You had to kind of push yourself.
yeah.
It
I mean,
wasn't kind of handed on the plate.
and David, like you say, with your parents, my parents were incredibly supportive, but there
Yeah.
just wasn't that knowledge of the way that one could go. No one had been to university. No one,
Yes.
it was just, you know, so, and
Yes.
even today, I think they're a little bit boggled about
It's
what
about
I
what you're
do.
doing.
Yeah. It's very hard for them. And my dad's constantly going, well, how have you done that? And how do you get there? And how
Yes.
did it? And I'm just, it's hard to explain because it's all part of the trajectory, but
I can imagine. I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember giving my parents a copy of I wrote a book on Greek mythology and then one on Celtic mythology. And I remember giving them these, and they were so proud of them. They're in their kind of book cabinet. But every now and then my mum would say, what is it you do again? You know, and they couldn't
yeah.
quite-
Yeah, no, I actually have always thought about interviewing them for them to tell me what they think I do. Just it would be quite interesting, I think.
Anyway,
Yeah,
as you know, it all works out in the end. But you
yeah,
know, yeah, you have to push yourself. So you came through that education, did the BTEC, and then what attracted you to Brighton? Because I think have you settled in Brighton? Am I right in saying?
yeah. I've lived here for like 20 odd
Yes.
years. I It's a really silly thing is that there was I came down at the weekends because it always felt fun and there's always lots of bright lights and stuff. But there was a shop that's on its on its front, it said the best kebabs. And I used to have a kebab from there, and I just used to think, my God, they are the best kebabs. You know, like literally thinking that they were the best kebabs in the whole world. And for some reason, I thought that was super glamorous. And so that was one heavy pull to do that. And then it just wasn't so far away. Unlike my daughter, she's gone off to Edinburgh, but I kind of I needed to be close, and it just seemed like a fun, creative place to exist in, and it really is, and we haven't really found anywhere better to be
I agree.
outside of London. Yeah,
No, when I love going down to Brighton. There's the
yeah,
for Maura and Michelina, have either of you been to Brighton on the south coast of England? Very easy to get to, you probably have.
Yeah, I even
It's like
visited
a nice, it's like
Claire.
a yeah, you've been there. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, we visited Claire's at her studio
Oh,
with
you went
Annette.
and visited.
Yeah, we did like an interview with Claire, which was super fun
Oh,
to
it's
see her
part of the
in her
project.
space. Yes. So we
Let's
went
talk
there
about
in
let's now
summer.
talk let's talk about the project then. So let's start with Maura and well, Michelina can carry on talking. How can you tell us about how you came across this project while at Sotheby's Institute
Yeah,
and then
of
what happened?
course. Well, at first I got involved like through a curatorial program that Sotheby's Institute of Art offer as a optional program of curating that it was called Reimagining the Monument. And the initiative was like to bring together all the students from different MAs at the Institute to explore what a monument could and should represent today in a way. And and then commission new works from different artists each year, I feel. And in this case, the artist was asked to respond to different ways in which technology shapes and challenge, in a way, our sense of interaction with others. And yes, well, I first heard about this program like in the first day of a introduction of a course, and I knew I wanted to participate in it and I feel like it was a big challenge to commission an artwork for an institution as the Victoria and Albert Museum. But yes, I knew for sure I wanted to participate in, so that's how I got involved.
Fantastic. Michelina, did you have a similar story?
Yeah, I think when I heard like during the first days of our course that we will be able to take part in the commissioning for a public art institution, I was very interested because I had no idea about it. I've never worked in the arts before our masters. So similarly to Maura, it sparked my interest to be like, oh my God, I will be able to work with an artist, be a part of a commission for such a big institution. So I just decided to take part, and throughout I met my colleagues on the course because I didn't know Maura before, and of course Claire, which has been an amazing journey for the whole year. Obviously, after we've chosen Claire to be our artist for the commission. So more or less in May, I think it happened.
And so Claire, were you approached?
Yeah.
Who approached you for this project?
I was in an exhibition that Hannah Redler Hawes, who was working on the project. I was in an exhibition that she curated in Leuven a few years ago. That's in Antwerp, Belgium. And we had kept in touch, and I think she's phenomenal, a very big brain. And she asked me if I would want to pitch for the commission. And I thought the opportunity, similar to Maura and Michelina, the opportunity to work with Hannah, but also work with Sotheby's Institute and the V&A as well, which I'm part of the collection. It just seemed to, it spiked my interest. And I'm always interested in new opportunities that bring about, your brain working and thinking about how you can make something work. So and that's kind of the way I like to work in some respects, is responding to a situation and rather than just kind of make work every day. I kind of like that kind of call and response kind of way of making work. And so I put together a proposal, and it was quite a system process we had to go through, and that's where I would have first met the students, when I first delivered my proposal. And then I think I had to then answer further questions on another session, and there was quite a few different there was quite a process. And then I was told I had the commission, which was quite surprising to me in a way, because it was for a digital festival. And in actual fact, I had completely switched it around and made it incredibly analog. So it was kind of really big contradiction. I like the idea of shoving an enlarger into a digital festival. It kind of seemed quite nicely perverse, really. Obviously, there was a digital element to it, but that was my first reaction. It's almost like a childish reaction in a way. It's like, no, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'll do something different. So I was quite surprised in the end that it was chosen. But that's kind of the genesis of the project. That's how I got involved. And yeah, I mean, it's been a very lengthy project in a way, and I feel like I have got quite involved with the students. I've gone back to do a lecture. I'm doing this now. And then we spent a very hectic weekend all together, which was, again, another chance to kind of connect with the students. So yeah, it's been a really hardy process, I would say.
So maybe we could come back to Maura and Michelina now. Did you have to kind of like give some instructions to Claire about what you were imagining, this title, reimagining the monument, about what she might do with her artistic practice, where she's so interested in analog photography and the interface between that and digital art. How did that work? Did you actually write out some questions, or did you meet and do this quite informally? I don't know if, Maura, do you want to start on that? How, what happened next, basically, after you'd expressed your interest?
Well, I remember there was this first like idea of like how technology shapes and challenge our interactions. Like that was the main thing. And we got like proposal from different artists. And I
Yes.
remember we were meeting like once a week last year. Last year it was once a week or between like 15 days. And I remember when we had to read all the proposals, and the thing that Claire says, that to be different from others, I feel that was personally what really attracted me to Claire's proposal, because I felt like when you speak about technology, it can be quite obvious nowadays, and maybe everyone speaks about like, oh, I don't know, you put like screens or like AI, but in a way, really obvious way. And I felt like Claire was really different, and she was talking about technology, but also this analog part. And yes, and then we had to vote for a proposal, and I remember everyone vote for Claire. Not everyone, but in a way, like most of us
The
vote
majority.
for Claire. Yes, it was really clear in a group.
Mm.
And then we have to write a kind of text about like what a monument means for all of us. And yes, it was like like, I don't remember. I don't know if you, Michalina, want to follow how.
Yeah,
But
so
what I
maybe
tell
I
you,
can.
the question I have, which Michalina can perhaps riff on, is what, with not, I don't want to, spoiler alert, but basically I got this lovely old-fashioned orange-coloured letter through the post with handwritten name and address on it, and a stamp with, first stamp I'd had actually, I think, with Charles I as the new, Charles II, sorry, Charles III, if even, as the new monarch. So that I got that, and this, as I understand, I mean, is this the monument, or could you talk about, because when you say monument in an artistic context, we're certainly thinking about something grand in scale, like large scale. So maybe Michalina, you could say about how you interpreted what was about to happen as a monument.
Yes, so continuing on Maura's thoughts. So the first and foremost kind of idea and task for us as a group of students, we were about 30 at the very beginning, and then
Oh, really?
once the project continued, we got like a smaller but
Mm.
more engaged group, which was great because we could do it more efficiently and be engaged. So we defined what the monument means for us, and obviously we were preparing commission or preparing a draft idea for the artist to have a commission at the Victoria and Albert Museum, but at Digital Design Weekend. So we wanted to see what the monument really means for us. And the initial thoughts were like, the monument is something big, as you said, something very like a sculpture of a warrior, something that lasts. But at the same time, nobody knows what does it mean, because we see those monuments, we see those sculptures, but we don't know who that is. They are there, they exist within the society, but often we forget what they are. And with this thought, we kind of went with the idea of archives, because monuments are like archives which are visibly invisible in a way in a society as sculptures. And from there we went to archives, memories, photography, and that we thought that this kind of reimagining monument would be focused on photography in some sort of way, which already prompted probably us to then further on choose Claire's, even though she's obviously not focused on like a digital like work. It's more analog. So coming back to your question, I think that what you got, I could make it for you since you couldn't physically be there, but you still got your print of I think a butterfly or a horse. I'm not sure now.
I tell you what, let me just show it for those of you who are on video, and maybe then we could ask Claire how she responded to that basic prompt. So this, oh, it's always hard to get this in focus. This is the photograph on nice glossy black and white paper. I remember developing my own photographs with a very cheap enlarger. When I was doing my research, actually, I was taking black and white photographs in Pompeii in the Roman archaeological site as part of the data. And you print it out with an enlarger in a dark room, which I made myself, and light was getting in. But that's what I received through the post, and it's really intriguing because as Michelina said, I wasn't able to get to the event in the V&A, even though I live only like half an hour's train ride away, because the trains had broken down that morning. I was on my way, and then I contacted Michelina and I said, look, maybe you could do one for me. And she said, well, give me your instructions. And so maybe we could come back to Claire and say how you responded to that initial prompt.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to, because the thing is with a project or sort of the way that I work is that like there's so many different elements that come into the whole, and there's so many reasons why the project exists. But I would say that like my thoughts about the monument is that we're in a time when we're questioning monuments and whether certain monuments should exist, whether they have a relevance to today's society, whether they are or whether they're causing harm more than good. And I kind of related that to the ideas of the photographic, because we have this idea that that photography is this document of truth, that it tells us exactly what happened at that moment in time. But of course, it's just a snippet of what happened in that moment of time. So again, it's sort of like photography seemed to have this connection with monuments in a way that perhaps what we think about them is changing or is not exactly the truth of that moment. So that was what I was interested in, the link between monuments and photography, is they aren't necessarily what we think that they are sometimes. And then later, of course, then what I then took on from there is that this was a digital festival. And I have a habit of looking at the history of art to kind of make comment on the present and the future as well. And I looked back to the first electronical transmission of an image, and that was like in 1880, I think. That's a long time ago of this kind of forethought of what the world was going to operate on. And it was by a guy called Shelford Bidwell, who was the first person to actually think about the transmission of electronic imagery. And the first images he chose to transmit were of a horse and a butterfly. So there I've got my title already. And then I think, well then, okay, so what will I do now? And I thought, okay, in 2012, I stopped making my own photographs. I was a photographer, but kind of stopped making them, primarily because of the influx of digital imagery. And it just felt nonsensical to keep making my own photographs when I can grab and borrow and take from wherever to make the comments that I want to make. So I kind of stopped making them, but then I had all this history of my photographic previous. So that's where I trained an AI on my whole backlog of work. And then once that AI was made, it was out of about 40 to 50 images. I then prompted for an image of a butterfly and of a horse. And that is what then that was put back into analog, sketched back onto film, and that's what everyone was printing from in the V&A at that moment in time. And I was in the darkroom. People came in, I supplied them with paper, they made the print, and they were under controlled conditions in that I knew what the exposure would be to get a good print. They just had to put the paper in, press the button. But during that time, they could do whatever they wanted. So they could put, like you prompted me for a D put on, and sort of like, you could put your hands over, you could interrupt the process if you chose. That's fine too. But whatever happened, then the paper, the undeveloped paper, got taken out, popped into an envelope, which you would have put your address on, and then put into a kind of post box. I then went home or went to my studio, developed them, and sent them all back out. So instead of this kind of quick process that we do of an everyday basis of sending images really, really quickly at a second's notice, we're going from a very protracted circulation of imagery by going back to snail mail. Now, I don't know what that all means, but I think it's interesting. It's a real kind of mashup of the generated image, the network image, the digital image, and the generated image. And I think at this moment in time, when imagery is so central to our everyday, that it's kind of a sort of monument to that too, in a way, about how we use imagery and how it's so central to our lives, more so than the written word now, I would think.
And in the photograph or artwork that I received, as far as I can only see, maybe I'm looking, I can only see a butterfly that looks so it's been sort of perhaps processed digitally. Is there a horse in that image as well?
All right. Okay. First day, everyone got to print the horse. The
Yes.
second day, everyone got the butterfly. So I'm afraid you haven't got the horse. But if you look at the two images that people printed on each day, they bear heavy. I made it very, very obvious that if you were to look in my books and the published books and the work that I've made, there's really strong connections to each image, so you can see how the AI has made the image because it's come so heavily from my back catalogue.
Oh, brilliant. And but also in the same envelope, I got some horses.
Yeah, well, lucky you.
Is that just random or?
We had I had a load of, it's an event. It's a monumental event.
It's lovely.
You have to make people welcome and wanting to interact. And so we just had a big basket of or not basket, but big box of stickers of horses and of butterflies, primarily for children, but in actual fact, lots of people ended up with them all over them. But yeah,
I can
it's
imagine.
about thinking about a wholeness to the project, and just like something's daft, like well, not so daft, but something like stickers can actually welcome people in a bit. And then, of course, there was some left over, so I stuck them in different envelopes when I was posting back. Not everyone got them, David. You were lucky.
And did you have butterfly equivalents for people who had the horse?
Yes, but quite frankly, just anything got shoved in. I
Okay.
wasn't being very
Yeah, brilliant.
discerning.
And when you're talking about monument, it's quite interesting because I did think about the project being called Imagining the Monument. And I asked Michelina to create, I told her not to tell anyone actually, but I said, could you somehow make the sign of the cross on my one? And of course the reason for that is thinking back nostalgically through my upbringing, but also thinking of like my granddad, who was in World War One and suffered mustard gas. My dad was in World War Two in the Navy, and watched his, his boat was sunk and people died. And I was thinking about almost remembering them by having this kind of cross image play. And the cross, of course, is a monument. Cross is a monument to something that most people have forgotten what it means now, but they're still there. And we've just had Remembrance Sunday, and I was out in Norfolk over the weekend where they really, really celebrate the remembrance of those who died in particularly World War One, World War Two, because those villages lost some of them lost nearly all of their men in that awful war. And then when you go through these villages, I don't know if Maura and Michelina have been outside of London, and you see these crosses where on Remembrance Sunday in November wreaths are laid and people wear poppies and everything. So it's funny how everything has come together, and now we're doing this podcast, and it's and of course we're in danger of forgetting that, you know, that these people who died, you know, it's 100 years ago. Do we need to keep having this Remembrance Day to remember these people, or does there come a moment when we can stop? And I guess the big answer at the moment is people are still dying in wars,
Yeah,
obviously.
exactly. Yeah. It's we can remember lots of deaths and current deaths, and yeah, for sure.
Mm. So monuments can also be very emotional for people, and but as Michelin said, you can forget them. You can forget what they mean. We walk through London. There are these kind of rather boring, often kind of classicizing, gothicizing things, and you don't really don't even notice them, you know. And so it's a good way, I think, of remembering that. But Claire, coming back to your practice, could you say a little bit for the audience where, you know, you went to college and then in Brighton, and then how did your practice then develop, and when did you start getting group exhibitions, presumably first, and then solo exhibitions? How did that develop?
Yeah, I think I mean, I know how I got my first exhibition, and that was literally when I had just left my degree, and a photographer had come into our course, and I had shown him some work, and he said, I know someone that's curating a show, and I will let her know about your work. She might be interested. And it was a curator called Val Williams, who's very strong in the photography world, still is. And she was doing a show called The Dead, which was happening in Bradford Museum. And then I think it toured. And she saw the work and she said, yeah, I'd like to use it. And I was just like, you know, bowled over, to be honest with you. And that was kind of where it started, really. So I was kind of given a very fortunate kind of step up into exhibiting really quickly in a way. But then, of course, you have to keep the momentum going. You can't just dine out on a one-time exhibition. But she was very formative in my career for sure, and in a lot of people's careers, actually. And you find that there will be people along your way that sort of stand by you and say, yeah, this is good, let's do something or whatever. And I think sometimes even there's some people that you don't necessarily have a great time with, but even so, their intervention allows your work career pathway to jump around a bit. And then you kind of get to a point where I am now, where, you know, I've just been around for such a long time, you can't get rid of me, really. But you know, I'm always open to different ideas, and I think that's been useful really for me, in that I can make something, you know, as long as it's interesting, I'm really open to doing stuff. And I can make things that are relatively small seem very, very big as well, which I think is a handy thing to do. So yeah, I mean, it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, you know, and sometimes you feel like you're hanging in like this. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for the last 30 years now. So as I say, you can't get rid of me, really. But there are people that are instrumental, and there are kind of symbiosis. I don't know, like it's like chemical stuff. It just kind of works and something happens and it pushes on to different pathways. It's very hard though to track it in some ways. Although sometimes it is easy to track it, I can say, but it's very hard to plan for. That's what I would say.
Just reading in wallpaper. I picked it up in a fish and chip shop or wherever you get these things, dentist probably, if it's wallpaper.
I had
And
working wallpaper, don't knock it.
no, and anyway, it had a really interesting interview. Just chimes very much with what you're saying, between Wayne McGregor, who's amazing choreographer at the moment at the Royal Ballet in London, and Max Richter, this fantastic composer. I don't know if more and
Yeah.
Michelin, or if you've heard his work, it's worth listening to. And they work together quite a lot. And they were saying just what you're saying. They were saying that we did. So they're basically doing a ballet, which I'm going to in a few weeks in London, based on who are they? The novels of, oh God, Margaret Atwood, or I think, is it? And these are these post-apocalyptic trilogy that she did. But they're saying that, you know, that she's still alive, and they were speaking with her. But they were saying that they don't like to. McGregor says, as a choreographer of ballet, he doesn't want to do what traditional composers have done, which is to write a ballet, you know, knowing it's going to be for dancers. He wants Richter to do his own response to the novels, and then he will riff on that with his choreography, and they work very much, you know, it just kind of comes, and Richter's saying the same thing. I'm not writing music thinking this is going to become a ballet. I'm just writing my music as a response to this event, in this case, you know, the reading of the novels. So it's just an interesting coincidence that maybe it's a particularly interesting part of artistic practice at the moment, you know, this almost serendipity and letting things happen organically.
I think something that I learned along the way is that also when people ask you to do something, there's always that, or there can be that kind of instant need to do what you think they want, you know, to get it right for the person that's asked you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that just leads down the wrong path, I think. What I've learned is always best to do exactly what you want to do, because in actual fact nobody knows what this thing's going to be, and you kind of lead on that. So like trying to please people, thinking what they want is can be really negative or bad way of going about things, which sounds odd because you should be wanting people to like what you do. But I think what I've learned is that you always must do what you feel, and regardless if it seems wrong, because usually it's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maura and Michelina, maybe Maura first. We, could you talk about your reflections of the final weekend? I know we're cutting a little bit out of the story, but what was it exciting to go down to the V&A on that weekend in October, I think it was? And could you talk about some of your experiences? Anything funny happened? Anything surprising happened? And then I can ask Michelina the same.
Of course, Mona, it was super fun and I really enjoyed it, and it was really interesting too, because when you are working with people and an audience and you never know who will come, so there are so many things you can't prepare before, and there's something about that is really nice. And I really enjoy when I was helping in getting people into the room, and I was like accompany everyone like into the room. And I remember there was a family, they were from Romania, I don't remember, and they asked Claire to put their fingers like all together, and it was like the first group that I saw they wanted to do something into a photograph, and I felt that moment, I will remember it because it was really cute and nice. And I don't remember if you, Claire, remember that, but I don't know. So yes, I have few things I remember, and it was really interesting and really fun, and it was super nice to share a weekend with everyone and being in a museum, and also see the backstage of like public institutions such as the V&A, like from when you enter, and since the museum is closed, so all the things that it's a beautiful experience to have. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Michelina, do you have any stories to tell from that weekend?
Yeah, for me, similar stories to Maura, but I think the highlight of the whole event and our project was actually the end of it and the packing. We stayed just like 5 people maybe, and we packed all the enlarger and the tent, and as Maura said, it was already after hours in V&A, dark. It felt like a night in a museum a little bit. So after all the year of this project, meeting Claire, meeting all the friends at Sotheby Institute, it was like a weird and exciting feeling to be able to actually finish it, be satisfied with Claire being our artist, with us learning so much stuff. So we were like dancing a little bit, lying on the on the floor, like listening to some old hits from Claire's radio station that accompanied us throughout the experience. So yeah, I think that's the highlight. But of course, as Maura said, we had many great visitors with kids, like elderly people, like all of them came, and they had different experiences, which was nice to see.
That's brilliant. And I think both you and Maura are, in your own ways, I think, probably going to go into kind of at least, curatorial careers. So, um, Maura, could you say how this experience might have affected your minds from a curatorial viewpoint? Do you think or is it too early days to say?
I'm not sure yet, but I feel it was really interesting because the things about visitors, I work in curatorial, I had curatorial experience before, but when you're working with an installation, and that it was my first time, there is something about the visitors that take another perspective in a way, because like visitors really take part of experience and the work than when you have like something hung on the wall is really different, because the visitors of course are really important, but I felt like to know this and to work with this kind of yes, work, it was super interesting, and I think that's a thing now I can realize it will change my perspective. Yeah.
But maybe occasionally doing things that engage more with the visiting public.
Yes.
That's great. And Michelina, do you think that how might this affect your future work, views on art?
Yeah, I think that for me was the photography aspect, because I have worked with photographers before, but I never actually was in a darkroom. Funny enough. So throughout this project, when I was visiting Claire in her studio, we've seen the darkroom. I've done it all myself. It kind of opened a new perspective for me as maybe a person who will help artists to sell, their photographs or work with photography and stuff like that. It opened another dimension for me because I understand the process. I've done it. I've explained it to other people. I, explained it to myself. I've been explained by Claire. So I think that's like the highlight of the show for me and for my future career development.
That's
think
brilliant. And sorry, Kate.
yeah, I think that's a really good point, because lots of visitors had never been in a dark room before, and that's no surprise really. But was amazing that there were points when people were just like, oh, that's how it works, that's how it, and that could be a kid, or there was a lady in her late 70s, and it was just like the penny really dropped, and it was amazing to see it on their face. And I actually remember that when I was 18, because I just couldn't work out how you would print a photograph, how a photograph got put onto paper. It just couldn't work it out. And I found a guy who had a darkroom in his bathroom, and I paid him a $5, and we developed film in there and did a print. And when I first saw it, I was just like, oh God, that's how it is. And I think it was amazing to see kids' faces, and you never know, just what that does to, say, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, or whatever. Once they've seen that experience, it could just stay there, and that could be something that pushes them on. We've all had those formative experiences that have made us push on to different things, and that was just really, really cool. But what also wanted to say is that it was really, really hard work, not just for me, but for the guys too. We were just like on it the whole time. It got boring, it got repetitive, but but also it was kind of cheerful and relaxed, and there was a really good feeling, well, I felt it, with the project, which is good. Working with the public is a really good beneficial thing, because there's so much feedback. I've worked in many exhibition spaces, and you just don't get that connection, and I found that really encouraging.
Sounds really positive. And I just wanted to, drawing towards an end, we've been speaking about, Claire, your practice being in this country, but you're represented by Parotta Contemporary Art, which is based in Cologne, Bonn,
Yeah.
Germany. And I think your recent exhibition is in Sweden, and you've had exhibitions in New York. Could you say something about how when you became international, if that makes sense?
Yes, so I think I had my first museum show in Germany, in Essen, in a very big museum called the Volkwang. And there was a curator there who's since retired, but she's called Uta Skilston. She's kind of like the big whammy of photography, really. And just through a series of bizarre events, we connected. I did a residency at the Volkwang. It was when I was pregnant, actually. And then she invited me back to have a big show. And so that was my first museum show, and that was in 2009. Just so happened to connect that a monograph book was being published at the same time. And so I became quite well known. That's not, but within Germany. And I think as well, because my name is Clare Strand, it actually is Clare Beach. So I kind of had this kind of pseudonym as well whilst I was there. But then that exhibition toured, and then you start becoming part of another group of, of European artists and European curators. And then it, again, like I say, it just, you meet, it jumps on from there, and then things become wider. But then I did then start being represented by a gallery in London called Brancalini Grimaldi. And they were short-lived. I think it was for about 5 years, and it was a brilliant gallery. It opened me up again to lots of people that were interested in the artists, and they had a good program, and they had a lot of customers. And so that was.
Sorry, I was also going to ask could you tell us about your collaborative partnership with Donald Strand, what that is?
Yeah, that's my husband.
Oh, that's what I thought. I
Yes.
assumed it might be.
So we met when I was doing my degree, so that's a long time ago.
Okay.
In fact, we sat next to each other when we first joined, and I gave him a mint, and not knowing who he was. And then I later realized that he cracked his tooth and had to go to the emergency dentist. That only came out in a few years' time when, anyways, funny. No, it's a collaboration between us. I mean, he's an artist, he's an editor and publisher. And of course, we talk a lot about projects, and sometimes we get together and make work, and it's like an entity into itself. It's neither me nor him, it's McDonald Strand. And it's actually quite a relaxing way to make work because it doesn't affect us. It's like being anonymous in a way. And
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it doesn't affect my kind of position with having to edition work, etc. So I can sell things very cheaply, and we can make a different kind of comment that both of our practices don't. So
Yeah.
it's a good vehicle for making different types of work.
That's fantastic. So I think we're coming to a close now. So on behalf of all the listeners, and I'd just like to thank Claire for being involved and enabling, Maura and Michelina and so many other students from the Institute to get involved in this wonderful project at the V&A. And there are names that we have mentioned, and there are other names we haven't mentioned. But I'd just like to, I think you all know who you are, and they'll be in the kind of credits, as it were, when I put it on Instagram. I really put some on when I posted the photo this morning. So Claire, thank you very much for sharing these ideas. And it was great to also hear from Maura and Michelina, the way they were very much an important part of this project that emerged with the butterfly and the horse show at the V&A. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a lovely forthcoming week.
Thank you.
Thank you.